Good morning to all. Welcome back to our course on the C programming language. In today's session, we are going to continue with the previous topic of multidimensional arrays, but we are going to discuss about how we are going to access the elements of 2D array. This is the topic which I am going to concentrate on today's session. While we go back to the previous discussions on the one-dimensional arrays, we know that accessing of elements of an array happens with a concept called as the indices. We know very well that every array that we use in the C programming language, the compiler will give some index numbers starting from 0 and ending with n-1, where n is the size of the array. And these indices, they help us in accessing the elements of the array in a random fashion. For example, let us consider that we have an one-dimensional array int a of 30 like this. So by the concept of indices, the compiler will automatically assign the index numbers from 0 to 29. Why? Because n is equal to 30. So the largest index will be n-1, that is 29. And now if I want to access the fifth element, I can access it by the array name and then I have the index number. The index where the fifth element is stored is 4. Therefore, I can access the fifth element of array A with this particular type of notation, which is a of 4. Similarly, if I want to access the 16th element, the 16th element is stored at index 15. So you have to access it by the array name followed by the index number like this. If I want to access the generalized formula, if I want to access the nth element of an array, you can do it by accessing it with the index number n-1. So nth element having n-1. This is a generalized formula to access any element randomly in the 1D arrays. It's not only the case with the 1D arrays. This indexing concept is also extended to the 2D arrays and the 3D arrays also. Now our point of discussion is how we are going to access the multidimensional arrays or the 2D arrays, whatever it is. Let me take an example of two-dimensional array, that is int a of some 2, 3. Now we know that this particular 2D array is represented in this format like this. This is 0, 1, this is 0, 1 and 2. And index is 0, 0, this is 0, 1 and this is 0, 2. Here it will be 1, 0, 1, 1 and 1, 2 like this. Right. And the same indexing concept will be applied to this two-dimensional arrays also. We know that the row size is 2 in this case. So the index number starts with 0 and ends with n-1. Therefore, 2 minus 1 is 1. Similarly, this is the column size, which is 3. Therefore, it is also the index of column also starts with 0 and ends with n-1, that is 3. That is 3 minus 1, which is equal to 2. Therefore, the indices are 0, 1 and 2. Now, how we are going to access the elements of 2D array? Random access. For example, if I want to access the first row second column element, so I can make use of the array name followed by the index numbers of the elements. The first box should consist of the index number of row which you want to access, and the second box should consist of the index number of the column which you want to access. So if I want to access the first row and second column index, I should write the index of here row as 1 and the index of column as 2. Or else if I want to access the 0th row first column, so I can do it like this: A of 0th row first column. This is how this accessing of elements should happen. The point here you have to understand is random access of elements in arrays, whether it is a one-dimensional array or a two-dimensional array, it always happens with the concept of indices. So the correct index number should be identified, and it is given by the formula nth element is having the index of n minus 1. The same concept can be extended, that is, the indices are always used to access the elements of the 2D array in a random fashion. Now let us see how we can make use of these scanf and printf functions for accessing the elements. We know the usage of the scanf function. The scanf is a predefined function which is used to read the values from the standard input device. Similarly, we have another function to print the values onto the output screen, that is the standard output screen, which is the printf function. But if you have remembered the concept of accessing the elements one-dimensional arrays, reading the values of the into the one-dimensional array and printing the values of the one-dimensional array can be done using the looping concepts. We know that C programming supports 3 types of loops. One is for, and second one is while, and the third one is do while. But as I told in the earlier discussion, that out of these 3 looping constructs, for is more readable in nature. Why? Because we have all the 3 parts of the loop, such as initialization, condition checking, and increment or decrement part, which we simply call it as updation. Everything happens in a single statement. So the for loop is more advantageous than the remaining for loops in terms of readability. Since one-dimensional array consists of only elements in only one dimension, if you want to read all the elements of the array from the standard input device, you have to make use of one for loop with one scanf. This is for reading. And similarly, if you want to print the elements of the one-dimensional array, you have to repeat the same printf statement for n number of times, where n is the size of the array. So for this purpose, I make use of one for loop with one printf function. This is for printing or writing, you can say, anything is okay. So reading from the standard input device and writing to the standard output device will take place in arrays with the help of one for loop followed by a scanf or printf function. The same thing can be applied to the 2D arrays also. If you want to read the elements from the standard input device, that is, you have to use the scanf function with the loops concepts. But remember, here in two-dimensional arrays, you have to loop the things. That means you have to repeat the same scanf statement for the rows as well as the columns. For this purpose, very important point you have to understand here is, for reading values into the 2D arrays, we know that we will use the scanf function. We know that we will use the loops, that too for loop, and since this has to be repeated for both the rows and columns, you have to use one for loop for repeating the number of rows and another for loop for repeating for the columns. So, two for loops, and that too they should be nested. So, finally, what I would like to tell you is, whenever you want to access a 2D arrays from the standard input device, it is better you go for the concept of nested for loops, including a scanf statement inside the nested for loop. Same is the case with writing the things from the 2D arrays, that is printing. If I want to print the values of the 2D array onto the standard output device, what I would like to do is, I would like to make use of the printf function, okay, with the for loop. And remember that you have to loop the things, or you have to repeat the things for the rows and columns. So, what I will do is, I will use one for loop to represent the rows and another for loop to represent the columns, and they should be nested. So, nesting should be used. With this in mind, let us quickly write one simple program to explain the concept of reading the values and printing it onto the screen with the standard input and output functions. So, I start my program with the preprocessor directive. I include the header file stdio.h so that my scanf and printf will work perfectly. And I start it with the main function int main. I declare a 2D array with the size 2 and 3, where 2 specifies the row size and 3 specifies the column size. Since this is a declaration statement, the elements will be allocated like this. This is 0 0 index, this is 0 1, this is 0 2, this is 1 0 1 1 and 1 2. And initially, since this has not given any storage class, they come under the category of automatic storage variables. Therefore, everything will be garbage like this. And now I want to read the values from the user. So, I just prompt the user, please enter the values of the array, right. So, to prompt, I just print a message to the user. So, printf \n, please enter %d values. So, how many values you have to enter? That is done by %d, and to this placeholder should have some values, right. So, what I will do is, this is equal to some 2 into 3. like this I can give, or else you can simply place it as please enter 6 values. That's it. Anything is okay, anything will work perfectly. Now the user is ready to give these 6 values. Now I have to read all those 6 values. So what I should do, I should use a scanf function, scanf, and since I am reading the integer values, the format specifier will be %d super, and the array is a, but where I am going to store it, where I am going to store an address of operator will be there, that we will decide it later. So as I told that you should have the 2 for loops, nested for loops, for I is equal to 0, I less than 2, I plus plus, and this is for j is equal to 0, j less than 3, j plus plus, and after this I close this one. So this particular scanf belongs to this for loop, right? So if you observe carefully this particular statement, you can see here that it consists of 2 for loops. This is called the outer for loop, and this is called the inner for loop. And remember that the outer for loop should repeat for the row size, and the inner for loop should repeat for column number of times. So the outer for loop represents the rows and the inner for loop represents the columns. That means the outer for loop will repeat for row number of times. So that is the reason why you can see here that I is less than 2, that is the column size I have given here. And here if you observe, this is j less than 3, this is the column size that I have given here. So the outer for loop will repeat for row number of times and the inner for loop will repeat for column number of times. So to avoid errors, what I will do is I will take 2 different values, I and variables I and j. Now let us see how it is going to execute. So here let us fill these 2 gaps also. Here it should have the row, and I know that row counter variable is I, so I should place I here, and here it should represent the column, and the column counter what I have taken is j, so I place j here. This is the complete scanf statement. Let us see what happens in this program, how it is reads the values. So I, j, these are 2 different variables. Here at this statement I is equal to 0, okay, and it will go for this condition 0 less than 2, okay, the condition is true, therefore it will go and enter into the inner for loop. Here j is initialized to 0 and 0 is less than 3, condition true, therefore it will execute the body of the inner for loop, which consists of only one statement, that is scanf statement. Scanf %d address of a of I and j. What is I and j? We have 0 and 0, so it is pointing to this location. Assume that the user has entered a value of 10 here. So what I will do, I will put, the compiler will put 10 here. Now after executing the scanf statement, it will go and execute this update, only inner update will happen. So j will get incremented, it becomes 1, and again it will test the condition 1 less than 3, condition true, it will execute the body of the inner for loop, which is the scanf % address of a of ij. Now the address of a of ij means address of a of 0 and 1, so this is the location which it is pointing out. Assume that 20 is stored here. Now it will go and increment the j value becomes 2 less than 3, condition true, it will execute the scanf statement, therefore the new value which is entered by the user will be stored at a of 0 and 2 here at this location, 30. Now it will increment the j value becomes 3. Now it will check the condition. 3 less than 3, the condition is false. Therefore, it will come out of the inner for loop and it will execute the outer for loop I++. Therefore, 0 is incremented to 1 and 1 less than 2, condition true. Again it will come into the inner loop. J is initialized to 0, 0 less than 3. Super, it will execute the body of the inner for loop, which is nothing but the scanf percentile the address of I comma j. So what is I? It is 1. What is j? It is 0. So the new element that is entered by the user will be stored inside this 1 0 here. Again j is incremented, it becomes 1, 1 less than 3, true, a of 1 1. So here it will store. Now it will increment the j value to 2, 2 less than 3, condition true. It will store the new value inside this address of a of 1 2 here. J is incremented, j becomes 3, 3 less than 3, condition false. It will come out of the inner for loop and it will execute the update part of the outer for loop. So I is incremented, so I becomes 2. Now check the condition, 2 less than 2, condition false. Therefore it will come out of the outer for loop also. Here it will come. Right. Now I have taken all the values from the user. Now I wish to print all these values, two-dimensional values, onto the standard output screen by using the standard output function, which is printf. So for anything, since you have 2 dimensions, you have to make use of 2 nested for loops. If it is 3D array, you have to use 3 for loops that are in the nested format. And always remember that the outer for loop is for rows and the inner for loop is always for the columns. So here I should use the printf statement, not the scanf. Why? Because I want to print the values. So it is percentile d a of I j, like this, and this is end of main. Again, for I is equal to 0, let me take these same values. I is initialized to 0, 0 less than 2, condition true. It enters into the inner for loop. J is equal to 0, okay. 0 less than 3, condition true. It will execute the body printf percentile d a of 0 0. So 10, this is output. Right. So 10 will be printed. Next it will increment j pointer. It becomes 1. 1 less than 3, condition true. It will print a of 0 1. What is 0 1? We have 20. So 20 is printed. Next j is incremented. J becomes 2. 2 less than 3. Super. It is true. Therefore it will print a of 0 2. A of 0 2 is 30. Next it will increment the j pointer. J becomes 3. Therefore condition 3 less than 3, condition becomes false. It will skip the inner for loop and it will go to the outer for loop. So I value is incremented, it becomes 1. Now 1 less than 2, condition true, go to the inner for loop. Now again j becomes 0, 0 less than 3, condition true. Now it will print a of I value is 1 and j value is 0, 1 0. What is 1 0? We have 40. Like that it will increment j. It becomes 1, 1 less than 3, therefore a of 1 1, 50 will be printed. Now increment j, it becomes 2, 2 less than 3, condition true, a of 1 2, it is printed. So a of 1 2 is 60. Now j is incremented. Now check the condition, 3 less than 3, condition false. The inner for loop will be exited and it will go and execute this statement I++, it becomes 2. 2 less than 2, this condition is also false. Therefore it will come out of the outer for loop also, and there are no statements to execute after this for loop. Therefore it will execute the curly brace of the main. That itself is the end of the program. So this is how the values of the values can be read from the scanf using scanf function, and values can be printed using printf function. So that's all about the accessing of elements in the 2D arrays. Let us have a quick recap of what we have discussed in today's session. So what we have done here is we have started our discussion with the how we are going to access the elements. What is the concept that is used to access the elements? It is nothing but the indexing concept. Yes. So if you want to access the nth element, you access it with the index number of n minus 1. And the same concept is extended to two-dimensional arrays. So you will be using the indexing, row index and column index, to access the corresponding row and column number. And after this, we have moved to the scanf and printf function, and we have discussed how we are going to access the one-dimensional array elements, or how we can store and print the 1D arrays using the for loop and scanf, using for loop and printf. And the same thing has been extended to the two-dimensional arrays, but very important thing you have to understand here is, for reading the values from the standard input device, that is keyboard, using the standard input function, that is scanf, you have to loop the things for two times, that is not for two times, two things. One for loop, you have to loop it for rows, and another for loop you have to loop it for columns. So always remember, when you are dealing with the two-dimensional arrays, you have to use a nested for loop for reading the values, and similarly you have to use the nested for loops to print the values. And finally, what we have done is we have seen an example of accessing or storing and printing the values of a two-dimensional array, programming example. That's all for today's session. Thank you one and all for joining the session, and this is the end of the entire arrays concept. Thank you all.